as well. You might be anywhere. So welcome. I'm Laurence. I'm the Executive Director of the French-American Chamber of Commerce based in San Francisco. We're based in San Francisco, but we cover all Northern California. So right now I am at home, but in California. So this is the 4th edition of our French versus Silicon Valley What's Next? French versus California, sometimes it depends on the topic. What's next? So the goal is to explore the next trend and the future of different industry. And today we're going to talk about education. As you know, this is the 4th edition. So before we talked about tech and the investment trend, we talked about wine, we talked about the food industry. And so today we're very glad to welcome two great guests for this topic of education. So we have on the French side, Marie-Christine Levé. We're very honored to welcome you today. Marie-Christine is the founder and partner at Edu Capital, so an investor in the new education, on the education of the future. So she's here today connecting from Paris, I think. And on the other side, based in California, we have Grégory Lablanc, who is a lecturer and teaching fellow at Berkeley Haas. And it's really an honor also to welcome Grégory. Grégory worked with a lot of also the French American business community, is a supporter of what we do, and work also with a lot of French schools, because Berkeley has, as you know, partnership with also EdTech, HEC, and of course many others. But I think Grégory can tell us more a bit later. I also want to thank Gilles Fontaine, who is the editor-in-chief of magazine Challenge. So as you know, these editions are co-organized with magazine Challenge, who is the first business magazine in France, and it's really an honor to have built this partnership with magazine Challenge. I'm going to tell you a little bit more why this partnership and why we did that in a few seconds. But so Gilles will be our moderator today. He has been moderator for all the live sessions, and it's also really an honor, as Gilles is the editor-in-chief of the magazine. So thank you very much, Gilles, for moderating, for preparing the panel, the question, and it's always very interesting. As you know, before I tell you a bit more about this partnership, because I always forget, so everybody will be on mute today, but you have a chat where you can ask any questions during the conversation, and we will read them at the end of the conversation, which will last at approximately 30 minutes. And then so we'll ask the question. So feel free during the conversation to ask any question, and we'll get back to them later. And also the session will be in replay on YouTube after, so feel free to share it, to like it, or to comment. And so I'm gonna start just to thank our sponsors, Capgemini and Work.com, so the app of Salesforce. So thank you very much for their support, because you know, as a French-American Chamber of Commerce, we are a non-profit, non-governmental organization. So the support of sponsors is really important for our activities. So I want to thank them again for their support. And so just a last word on the partnership with magazine Challenge. So as you know, we as a French-American Chamber of Commerce based in San Francisco, we foster and engage the French-American business community here. So our audience is executive investors, entrepreneurs based in San Francisco, based in Silicon Valley, and based in France also. And we help French companies to set up and develop their activities in the US. So we do this with our members, our events, and our corporate services. We organize a lot of learning expeditions for groups. We have recruitment, visa, you know, many services that we provide, business centers, mailbox for companies. And among the things we do is events. Of course, now they are digital for now. Hopefully we can go back to normal soon. But one of the big events that we organize generally each year is the French American Business Award event. If you haven't heard about it, it's called the FABA. So you can go to thefaba.com and you can see all the leaders since 2014 of Silicon Valley and France who have, you know, really a track record here in Silicon Valley. So and we wanted to do a partnership this year with Challenge on this event, because each year Challenge is doing an article on the leaders of Silicon Valley, and Gilles just told me that he wanted to come back to Silicon Valley to do an article this year. And so since we could not do it, and we were also planning to do a learning expedition with Challenge, which is postponed to next year, of course. So if you're interested to travel with Magazine Challenge and us for this learning expedition next year, you can receive some information. But since it was postponed, we decided to start this live panel session to cover different industry and to really bring together leaders of France and leaders of California or Silicon Valley to discuss about topics. So today is the future of education. I'm not going to be talking more, and I'm going to give the conversation, to start the conversation to Gilles Fontaine, the editor-in-chief of Channel. So thank you again, and see you at the end of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Laurence. And of course, the pleasure and the honor are mine. Good morning, everyone. Good evening to the French guys. It's always a pleasure to have you, and especially for this fourth episode of our series today. So, as Laurence said, we're talking about the future of education. The subject is, of course, of great interest to us all, and even more so in this time of health crisis and lockdown. Tens of millions of children and students have been forced out of schools and universities in recent months. This period risks further increasing inequalities, but it can also bring us for change. Maybe you can turn off your mics, because there's those who don't talk right now, because there's a kind of a noise in the back. It's not so nice. As I said, it can also bring some opportunities. And in France, for instance, the national education system made its digital revolution in 3 days. People thought it would have taken centuries to do that. It's not perfect, but it has been working. So we'll be talking about basically new education business models, new players in this area, the relationship between startups and institutions. And as always, we try to have one speakers on both sides of the Atlantic. And we have Gregory LeBlanc. Hi, Gregory. And so you're Berkeley Haas. You teach primarily in the areas of finance and strategy in the MBA and Masters of Financial Engineering programs and in executive education. And Marie-Christine Levet. Maybe not all of you know Marie-Christine on the other side of the Atlantic, but she's very famous in France. She's a kind of icon with 20 years of experience in the new technology area. She has been the founder and CEO of many companies here, like the French subsidiary of Lycos, Club Internet, big company here in France back at the beginning of the century. She's also a very active investor. In 2009, she took part in the launch of Jaina Capital, one of France's first entrepreneurs fund. And in 2017, she decided to create Edu Capital, which is the first European fund dedicated to EdTech. Marie-Christine, maybe you can tell us more about that and why you decided 3 years ago that education and the future of education was the main issue.
So thanks for inviting me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with Gregory. I think it's quite nice to establish links, between France and the US. So yes, 3 years ago we created Edu Capital, which is the first European fund dedicated to EdTech. In fact, it came from me from travel in the Valley. At that time, I was a partner at a fund in France, a generalist VC fund, and I was also a partner at the Google Fund for Media. I was invited by Google, and I visited the Valley, and I saw that there was quite a lot of EdTech funds in the US. At that time, I visited Learn Capital, Rich Capital, and then I say, why there's no any investment fund in Europe dedicated to EdTech. My belief is that education has at that time has to change. Education has not changed in the last 50 years. We still have the same education in France, and then our parents have had, except perhaps the color of the board, which became white instead of black. And the internet has been invented in 20 years ago. All major areas have been into major changes of business models, and the only area which has not change was education. And my belief is that it's not Accor who invented Airbnb, it's not SNCF who invented the BlaBlaCar. I believe that transformation comes often from young company, very agile, that can that do not have rigid frameworks and rigid organizations to change, and that can bring innovation in companies. And that was before COVID. In fact, 3 months ago, in 3 days, the entire world has gone into EdTech. More than 1.3 billion of children and young people, have experimented EdTech tools and platforms, and 150 countries have closed their schools. So it's true that we have had the biggest experiment ever we could have ever imagined, in all the different countries. So now it's really the time for EdTech. It was already the time, because in the last years 7 billion have been invested in EdTech in the world, but I think that there will be an before and after COVID on this area.
Gregory, how did you live this particular period as a teacher, as a person involved in in your community and in interacting with people? That must be well, maybe a lot of frustration, but also was it very new for you? I mean, you already have the habit, to teach from on a long distance in a remote way. How did things happen?
For me, it wasn't that much of an adjustment. I did my first online class in 2001 for a private company that no longer exists. And I developed the first online course for Berkeley Haas back in 2011. And so, within higher education, there have been quite a few people that have been, we're not all completely with our heads in the sand. I mean, a lot of us have been observing what's happening in the world around us. A lot of us actually, specialize in studying what's happening in the world around us. And so a lot of us within higher education have been, pushing for change. But I think as Marie pointed out, it's the legacy companies and I think, higher educational institutions are, legacy companies that have established brands and established ways of doing things are very reluctant to change. And even though there have been some initiatives within higher education, particularly in the US with HBX and partnerships with Coursera and so forth, the change has been relatively slow. So even if I was prepared, and even if many of my students were prepared, you can't just simply flip a switch and move to online, because once you change the delivery method, pretty much every single thing has to change. It's not simply it's like with a book. I mean, when you go from a physical book to a digital book, if you just take that physical book and throw it up as a PDF, okay, now you can access it digitally. But if you were going to design a digital book from scratch, it wouldn't be a PDF of a paper book. So there is a lot of dissatisfaction. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of disappointment. And there's a lot of questions around, hey, why am I spending $150,000 for this executive MBA if I'm just sitting in my living room on a TV screen, when I could get something similar from Coursera for free. So I think as Marie said, there's the technology change, which is long overdue. But there's also the business model change, which is long overdue. And the technology and the business model of education hasn't changed really since Bologna in, you know, the 13th century. I mean, if you go back and look at how, you know, University of Bologna, you know, transmitted information, and how they issued certifications and how they validated the success of their students. You know, we're doing pretty much the same thing, you know, pretty much the same thing. I mean, back then they thought that the earth would, you know, the sun went around the earth and you know, and that the earth was flat. And here, you know, we've changed everything else, and education is still, for the most part, you know, stuck in this model. So so I think that, you know, COVID's like a wake-up call, and in many areas it's accelerated digital transformation, like you said, from, you know, 10 years of digital transformation down to 3 days. But you know, we're only just beginning this journey.
Yeah, but can you can you disrupt this industry? If you can call it an industry, but it is in a way. I mean, can you disrupt education in the same way that the digital has disrupted the media industry, the music industry, the movie industry? Marie-Christine, what is your opinion? You said that only startup can change the game.
It's education, you know, world. There are like different areas, you know, because EdTech, and which is technology, you know, for education, covers a very large areas. It goes from pre-K-12 up to corporate training and lifelong learning. I really believe that corporate training can be disrupted as the other areas have been disrupted. And we saw that there begin to be big companies in this area. France is quite in advance, you know, with companies like 360 Learning, which is which offer learning management systems for corporation, and is going to the US, by the way. Basically, you know, companies have a lot of issues in that areas, and post-COVID, they will have more and more issues. They need to reskill their employees. You know, we speak about 20 to 30 to 40% of jobs that will be suppressed in the years to come. So a lot of jobs will be affected by AI, and a lot of companies will have to train their workforce. So I think corporate training can be disrupted as the other areas have been disrupted in all other areas of the economy. And then we have like the area of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning, you know, is like the individual who says, you know, I want to learn, to develop my employability. And I think the era is really to find a new job, to find a job more qualified. And this is the individual. And I think this can be disrupted by a new model, like, you know, Spotify has disrupted the music industry. And then we have the higher ed and the K-12, which belongs in most of the countries either to public education or to private education. I believe that higher ed will be very much disrupted in the years to come. And I think, I don't know, there's a very interesting article from Scott Galloway that some of you might know. And I just quote him, he said, big tech's entry into higher ed will be one of the main trends in the future. He's the one who predicts, you know, Amazon will buy Whole Foods, and he's the one who predicts WeWork collapse. So
he's a trustee at Berkeley Haas and an alum at Berkeley Haas.
Okay.
So, and I think higher ed will really be disrupted, because, you know, a lot of young people will say, you know, what's the point of going to schools, you know, just to sit in front of a teacher, and why not having the best teacher at home and go to school in order to collaborate, to exchange with my peers, etc. So higher ed, I really believe, will be the next disruptions in the years to come. Then becomes K-12. K-12 is more difficult, because I don't think, you know, for young children, you need the schools and you need the teacher. You know, the technology does not replace the teacher. The technology is at the service of the teacher. And this, you know, you need collaboration between public or private area and startups. And the disruption will not be done totally, you know, externally out of the schools. It needs to be a cooperation. And this is often, in some countries, like in France, the most difficult area to change. And then you are, then the last one, you have the parents, and the parents, I think, with this COVID phases, they have realized that the children can learn, with this online. They have discovered a lot of tools, and the parents can be also instrumental. But then, parents create also some social disruption between the parents that can do it and the parents that cannot do it. So I believe, for K-12, the public institution is key.
Yeah,
I
and
think, wait, Mary
French,
Christine.
yeah, and the parents became teachers in a
Yes.
few days time frame. Millions of teachers everywhere. But do not hesitate to write your questions down in the chats, and I'll pick some of them as we speak now, like Robert David did. He says, Tier 1 university professors can now teach pretty much everywhere at any time, less cost, better outcomes. That's more an assessment as a question, but the idea is there. And Gregory, can you get rid of schools, of universities, of amphitheatres, get rid of all that? I mean, schools and universities are also a way for a lot of people to socialize, to friends, to learn, how to live with others. Also, you build your networks, professional networks, when you go to university. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple points. I mean, as Mary Christine pointed out, education isn't just what we think of as the education sector. I mean, every time you brush your teeth, you're participating in dental work. Every time you take vitamins, that's part of the healthcare system. So education isn't limited to, teachers and professors. In fact, I would say most education takes place, on the job, or, at home, or, outside of the formal institutions. And so, that's where the innovation's happening right now is in those other areas. I think, another analogy to think of is, in the old day, I remember in 1981, I was 14 years old. I went to university and I bought an HP calculator. Okay, and 20 years later, I was still using that HP calculator, right? You buy your calculator and you can use it for 20 years. Now if you buy a phone, it's obsolete in a year. And not only that, the stuff on the phone, right? The software was hard coded on the calculator. Here it's updating every 5 minutes. So in the old days, you could go to school, K-12, go to education, get a college degree, and then you're done, and you just amortize that knowledge for 40 years. Now, by the week after you graduate, it's already obsolete. And so the education is not just being done by the universities just hand you off, but the work has just begun. So the challenge with the universities is that they're not, their business model has to be lifelong, and since they're failing in that, the companies are taking over, and the private sector is taking over. Now, with what Robert said about faculty, I think he's absolutely right. There used to be a piano player in every household. There used to be a piano player in every village. Every movie theater had a piano player. And now, like, how many people can play the piano, really? I mean, Alfred Brendel, he just, you can be in Antarctica and listen to Alfred Brendel. You don't need to have, a piano player locally. And so, to the extent that there are these, superstar professors, it's a winner-take-all market. But on the other hand, like, I don't really think you need a professor, to tell you. I mean, I recently went in and had some dental work done, and the guy was just using like a video game technology. And I said, hey, do you need like 8 years of dental education to do this? He said, nah, if you can play Nintendo, you could probably do this. And so I think that the professor, the role of the professor is dramatically overrated, and that, people can learn through technology. And so, if like at Colt 42 and other schools like that, I'm involved with a startup that does that. Those sorts of systems of transmission of knowledge are going to be increasingly important. And so if that's the case, then the university will, as you suggest, Gilles, provide merely a place a process of assembling and collecting minds that can sharpen each other, and it will really just be like a curation process you know, bringing people together into a you know, a club that will enable them to you know, feed off each other.
I think the model of Minerva, I don't know if some of you know Minerva. Minerva is a school in the US, and now it's more difficult to enter Minerva than Harvard. And Minerva does not have any physical schools. They do not have any physical classes. You know, all classes are done by teachers online. So they have the best teachers, you know, who provide classes online, but the students, you know, gather every day, and they work on projects, they work on collaborative tasks, and basically they develop, you know, the tools and the skills they will need in the world of tomorrow. And by the way, they change countries, you know, every 3 months. So they do 8 countries, you know, in 2 years, and this is just a bachelor. But you know, the fact why Minerva is able to do that, because they have a very, very good platform. They have a very, very good platform for teachers to use it, to share documents with students, and you know, they invest a lot in their platform. And this is a new, I think, a very interesting new model of education.
Yeah, and as you were both talking, I was thinking about this model we have in France, 42, 42. And I know, Gregory, you're also familiar with 42 in the Silicon Valley, this school that trains super high developers, super high, very, very premium class developers for big companies and all. And he sent, Robert David sent us the link of 42US.org, based in South, in the Bay Area. Is this a model that you can replicate in all areas? I mean, we're talking about code, but can you imagine education, I mean, philosophy, to teach philosophy without professors, or history without professors, or you know, it's hard to imagine. I mean,
well, I'm a big fan of project-based peer learning. You know, my early education was Montessori, and you know, all the way through 3rd grade, I went through Montessori, and you know, the teacher in Montessori school was really just kind of, you know, she was sitting there doing needlepoint most of the day, and you know, and just making sure the kids, you know, if they needed something, and that she would jump in. And you know, we did a remarkable job of teaching each other, because we had the environment was curated. And so when I went to mainstream school at 4th grade, I was astonished at how backward and how you know, primitive what was happening in the classroom was. And so I do think that project-based peer learning is a great way to teach. But I think that and I do think that 42 method is scalable, and that's why, you know, I'm working with the co-founder of 42 on a new project that the goal is to completely scale the 42 model, you know, worldwide. And you know, the really exciting thing about that project for me is when a recruiter comes to a university to recruit a student, you know, what information do we give them? I mean, we spend 4 years with the student, and we give them a number, like a 3.9 GPA, okay? And that's it, and maybe a letter of recommendation. Like 4 years of education, and we give them what, like 3 bytes of data on the student? Like, I mean, if I spend 10 seconds on Facebook, it captures probably 1,000 times more data than, you know, a university does in 4 years. And so, you know, what value are we adding to our real customers, who are the recruiters? You know, if we're dealing with professional education, we're providing them with 0 value. I mean, 0 value if their goal is to identify who they should hire and who's going to be a good fit. So if we can instrument the entire education process, the way we instrument, you know, the driving process if we're Tesla, or instrument, you know, the social media process if we're Facebook, or the search process if we're Google, or the, you know, the use of the phone process for Apple, if we can start instrumenting that entire education process so that a recruiter shows up and we hand them, you know, 10 gigabytes of data on somebody, so we know everything about how they interact with others, how they learn, what they're good at, what they're not good at, you know, their leadership ability, I mean, this would actually provide real value. I mean, because remember, at education, it's not always the student that's the customer. The student is often, you know, the product. and you know, we're not really providing a lot of value to the customer, who is the, you know, the recruiter. And then, you know, just like Spotify starts flipping that around, we could start flipping around, you know, the data that we learn from recruiters to the students, so that the students can get an education that actually helps them, you know, in the workforce, rather than giving them something that we kind of believe sort of is good because we professors are kind of interested in it and, you know, enjoy talking about it, which is not always lined up with what is useful, especially because what we're interested in has to do with what gets us published, and you know, it's also stuff that we learned in school 25 years ago. And so, you know, the use of data in the education process right now is only at the earliest stages.
Mm-hmm. This question from Laurent Oppenheim. Basically, we understand that classic education, classic school is old school, all right? And companies in India, he says, or in China, seem to be very successful. Do you think, do you believe such models can go beyond those borders and penetrate European and North American markets? If not, what is the biggest barrier of success? Marie?
Yeah, I can take this question because I think it's a very interesting point. You know, it's true that China has massively invested in EdTech in the last years. They invest between 3 and 4 billion, you know, per year, you know, $1 billion per year. They mainly invested in K-12, building unicorns. You know, they're like 10 to 20 companies, you know, in China that are unicorns, you know, company valued more than 1 billion. And India is coming with Biju. Biju was one of the biggest, you know, raise in the EdTech area. For the moment, you know, they could definitely can come in Europe. For the moment, it's just the question that Europe is fragmented with different languages. So when you do content, it's always more difficult, you know, to enter, you know, Europe, because you need to translate everything in different location. But definitely, you know, and I think that, you know, I speak as a European point of view, but I think it might be at one point, I don't know if I want my children, you know, to have the content and the history of France and the world, you know, taught by Chinese, you know, Chinese way of seeing the world, but it's a big, you know, threat for Europe. And basically, if we look at the COVID, you know, the big winners of the COVID were the GAFAM, because basically everybody, you know, teachers did classes on YouTube. They used WhatsApp, you know, to contact the parents. Everybody used Zoom, as we did, as we're doing right now, or, you know, Microsoft Teams for classroom. And basically, all these companies do not have models of education company. They have models of advertising company, you know, living on data. And that's why, you know, I think it's very important, you know, to build European champions, you know, in this area, you know, for the future for children, because it's a big threat for education. That education will be dominated by China, perhaps at one point. And, you know, we always have fun about the Chinese who do not speak English. I can tell you that Chinese children will speak a much better English than French children in the years to come.
Gregory, you want to jump on that? Can you imagine Chinese schools in the US?
Well, I think, look, the Chinese EdTech sector has exploded dramatically, and there's been a ton of investment and a lot of very successful companies. But I think of the Chinese EdTech companies and Indian EdTech companies as being, you know, primarily part of the mainstream educational ecosystem. In other words, they're teaching people how to get into universities. They're teaching people how to do well on standardized tests. They're teaching people how to, you know, succeed in that mainstream education environment, which I think, you know, most people agree does not correlate necessarily with you know, the skills that you necessarily need to succeed in today's world. So I would say that yes, we should learn from what they've done in terms of how they approach the technology. But I think that in the West, there's a much greater chance that the educational innovation will be in the name of useful skills, you know, creative skills, you know, rather than simply succeeding in this antiquated kind of standardized test environment. Obviously there's room for that. We have lots of companies that teach you how to do well on SATs and so forth here in the US and in Europe. But I think, that's not really where the future is, because at the end of the day, people don't really care about your SAT scores. They don't care about your GMAT scores. They don't really care about your, and they shouldn't care about where you rank in your ability to memorize, huge piles of stuff, which is really what Chinese and Indian educational system is, emphasizing relatively to European and American. Gilles, you're on mute.
You're mute.
I was on mute, sorry. Yeah, when you talk about new players, as Marie mentioned that earlier, do they really have to be startups? And you can expect even big companies, I mean, to go into these big changes that are necessary in the education system. What kind of, when you talk about new players in this game, who are you thinking of?
I guess innovation comes often from new players, because it's as we said earlier, it's very difficult to transform yourself when you incumbent and you have already your revenues based on traditional models, and it's very difficult to cut where you're sitting on, and that's why innovation comes often from new companies. But then it's true that publishers, in the US we've seen a huge M&A activity from publishers, like Macmillan, or who bought a lot of EdTech startups, because publishers will have to transform themselves. Basically, if you look at the different areas of publisher, I guess, and that Gilles, 40% of media has gone digital. And in the education world, we estimate that only 3% of the education market is digitized. There's a huge opportunity. And if you look at the different areas of a publisher, only the textbooks are the ones who survive and resist, and that have not been digitized. But this will not last. So I think all the big publishers will mainly acquire innovation by M&A. But I'm a strong believer of innovation coming from a more agile company, and then this company, when they attain a certain size, they can join corporation and be able to transform this corporation.
Gregory, you have something to add on this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, there's two players I think that'll work in this space. Obviously startups, but it doesn't need to be startups. It can be the Amazons, the Microsofts, and the Googles of the world that could also make a difference here. We're seeing LinkedIn Learning. I think LinkedIn Learning is doing some very creative stuff, because they have access to what employers want, and they have access to what makes somebody successful. And so you can use that proprietary data to figure out, how to build skills. So I think there are some big incumbent tech companies that could succeed in this space. But with the universities and the mainstream, I think they'll always be there, just like governments will always be there. But I think they're not going to be the ones that are leading the pack here. So within Haas, a number of us have had a conversation about Haas as a service. And you thought, wow, we've got the letters. We could be like the leader in business model innovation in business school, converting from product to service, having a subscription model, having updates and all this stuff. But, the problem with mainstream organizations, this is true for digital transformation across the board, is that you have, the architecture of the organization is optimized for the old model. So, at a business school, we have our alumni, we have our executive education, we have our program offices, and they don't share data, they don't share P&Ls, they don't share information, they don't work together, that have to abandon all their old KPIs, that have to change everything that they do, and it's just way too difficult, because people will be like, if I can just keep doing what I'm doing for the next 5 years and retire, then I don't have to deal with this stuff. So it's very, very difficult to force through these kinds of changes unless you absolutely have to. And so the top tier organizations, it's like the top 10, 20, 30, even though they're the ones that have the resources to do this, you know, Harvard, Yale, whatever, they're also the ones that don't really feel the pressure. It's the ones that are like the bottom tier that they're feeling the pressure, but they don't have the resources. And so I think that's why I think it's going to be mainly from outside of the universities where all the innovation is going to happen.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the impression I have is that, you know, like there will be new models of university purely online, and we've seen that arriving in the coding and all this digital, you know, teaching, and that has already happened, you know, Udemy and Udacity and all these pure online classes. I will have the impression that the universities and the higher ed that will be most challenged are the middle one, because the top tier one, you know, like the 20 or 30 best universities, they have really built their brand. And, you know, I think that one of the best, you know, their best result is their admission, you know, the admission criteria and the admission process. And this one will partner, you know, with, you know, digital areas, digital actors. Like, for example, there's a company called Trilogy in the US. Trilogy, you know, is teaching coding, and they
Berkeley partners with Trilogy.
Yes, they have partnered with all major universities. But, you know, I think which is more, you know, we can ask a lot of questions about the other schools, the ones that are not in the top, you know, the top 30, and you can ask yourself, will parents still, you know, pay, you know, $50,000, you know, a year, you know, for children attending less, you know, less exclusive universities, or can they have the best teachers online? And in terms of, so this is for higher ed. For K-12, I really believe that you still need, you know, the schools and the teacher, but I believe, you know, there will be the rise of a lot of new much more innovative schools. You know.
And use technologies, right? That's what in France, for instance, the teachers are really reluctant to use new technologies and
using technology much more oriented towards, you know, bilingualism, or, you know, much more innovative.
And Camilo Mendes has an interesting point. He says, and he asks, do you think that universities could consolidate just like corporations do, and integrate the best of class professors, virtual classes?
So I mean, my feeling is that, you know, and we've had a lot of discussions with that here in Berkeley, is this whole idea of like Berkeley inside, or, you know, Harvard inside, or Stanford inside, right? You know, just like every person, when they go to visit the doctor, they should be able to get access to the best quality medical care, right? And every time, you know, you listen to music, you should be able to listen to the best possible musician, no matter where you are in the world. It shouldn't depend on, you know, you happen to be living in Afghanistan, so, you know, you get a doctor that's different from the doctor you get in California. I mean, with today's technology, you should be able to get the best. And so if you want to build out a school in remote part of the world, it would take you decades to build out the human capital you would need, the professors you would need, and the teaching assistants you would need, and the PhD students you would need. You know, whereas what we can do from a place like Berkeley, or Berkeley Haas, Berkeley Engineering, you know, Berkeley Law, we have among the, you know, the best intellectual firepower. And so, you know, just like, you know, Intel inside, if you could have like these OEMs, or these, you know, franchisees, or these distribution centers, you know, located all around the world, and then we could power that. We could fire that up. We could send out the core, you know, operating system and the basic apps, and then they could, you know, do whatever needs to be done locally. You know, locally. I mean, you know, Exxon and Mobil, they ship the oil to the local franchisee who's on the street corner, and, you know, McDonald's ships out all the you know, hamburgers and IP and recipes to their franchises. I don't see why the franchising model is not a possible future for the best in class schools, like HEC, you know, like Polytechnique, like you know, like Harvard, like Berkeley.
And Greg, Biltzar would like you to define exactly what you mean by the best.
Yeah, well, I might be a little biased and prejudiced, obviously, here. You know, I like the places where I teach, but you know, best has to mean most effective, right? Most effective at screening applicants, most effective at you know, delivering content most effective at analyzing what works, what doesn't work, most effective at placing students, most effective at, and again, like that's going to have to change because what we were good at in the past isn't necessarily going to work in the future.
And also, best also can mean universities oriented towards employability. This ROI of education. When you pay so much, in your tuition fees, ROI will become important, for parents and families.
And Servan de Mol has a very obvious question, I think. So, some education needs more practice that takes care in labs, medicine, chemistry, etc. How does the online education helps with experiments?
I can take this question and then give you a very concrete example. We invested in a company called Labster. Labster is a Danish company, and they provide experiments, to teach science and to teach mainly chemistry and physics. And it's virtual laboratories that you can see either in 2D or in 3D or with, VR glasses. And they have equipped all K-12 students in Denmark, and they are partnering with like more than 700 universities in the US. And basically, because in most of K-12 and also in universities, people do not train themselves enough when they teach science. It's very theoretical, and they don't practice. And here it's like you do virtual experiments, and the teacher can create their own experiments. They have a platform to do it. So it's a really good example how what technology can bring to education. And I think that we will see a lot of that happening in medicines. I've seen a lot of startups teaching, like for example, when you to be surgeon, you don't exercise a lot, you do a lot, most of the surgeons, they don't exercise a lot, and there are a lot of startups who position themselves in this area to help people practice it.
I mean, think about how we teach pilots. I mean, pilots, they spend an awful lot of time in fake planes before they ever get control of a real plane.
Yeah.
And if you think about the importance of video games, I have a lot of friends at this company called Unity that makes the building blocks of gaming software. And if you want to build, anybody can build out a game with relatively little amount of training because they have in the background all the rules of physics and everything else that you need in order to build out a virtual environment. I think we will probably see a lot more of that type of education and training, which can be useful in experimental lab environments.
Greg, I'd like to come back on what you mentioned earlier, taking the example of the dentist. I mean, can you really imagine that? I mean, a surgeon could become a surgeon just by watching YouTube courses and
No, I think
that would be scary, right?
YouTube is just the start, right? I would want them to, but I would much rather that they practice their surgery on fake people than on me. You know what I mean? So I'd rather them get their practice on working those little video games, just like I'd rather have the pilot. If I get when you go to the checkout counter and it says trainee cashier, to avoid that line. Imagine you're getting on a plane and you see trainee pilot. Like, I'd rather not get on the plane. And yet, what do you do when you go to a teaching hospital? You get a trainee doctor, working on you. And we understand that the price of medical education is, a bunch of medical mistakes. And we have, in the U.S., medical mistakes is the #2 cause of death. I'd rather come up with a system that substantially reduces the number of medical mistakes and improves the education process for these doctors. And so I do think that, by reducing the amount of human capital you need to do these routine tasks, we can, focus more and more on learning the higher level tasks. And remember, a lot of our education, if you're trying to teach someone to be a CPA or, these skills that were once super important are going to be much, much less important. And that's why the nature of education has to, change its focus more towards, creativity, more towards problem solving. And this doesn't lend itself to the passive learning. And that's why I think, Coursera, edX, all these MOOCs, this is a fantastic way to replicate lecture-based learning. But at the end of the day, lecture-based learning is obsolete. Like we have to move past, you know, lecture-based learning and you know, the sage on the stage, and we have to move towards more hands-on learning. If you want to learn to code, the only way to do it is to code. Okay, you know, and if you want to learn to operate, the only way to do it is to operate. You want to learn to swim, you got to jump in the ocean. And conventional, you know, replicating that part of the bricks and mortar educational experience is the technological challenge of our day. And I think the companies that get that right are the ones that are going to succeed.
So maybe one last question before we wrap up. Time is running too fast. What is, in your opinion, what do we need, I mean, to make things change and to do this, well, let's call it transformation, right? Not necessarily a revolution, but, you know, I think in France, for instance, when, you know, in next September or maybe later in October, you know, they would all go back to school as usual. And I don't think there will be any big transformation. I don't know, you know, maybe there would be you know, a few tech items added to their education program. But what do we need? Is it money? Is it you know, cultural change? Is it, what do you think, Marie? You want to start?
I think you know, France and the US are very different in that respect. In France, we need three things. We need the first to train the teachers, because teachers has not been trained to teach with digital. Then we need innovation, pedagogical innovation, because for the moment in France, you know, EdTech has been only resumed to, you know, giving, you know, tablets or, you know, computers to children. And, you know, we have not invested in innovation in the pedagogy. We need pedagogy, really a lot of innovation. We need to teach differently, you know, with the technology. And in France, you know, which is not the case in the US, we need money, because, you know, we have not invested enough in this area. You know, like if we give you an example, you know, we must spend, you know, a couple of 10 to 20 millions, you know, euro per year, you know, by the Ministry of Education in innovation with pedagogy. So we need to invest massively in these areas, you know, to be able to build champions and to build the company that are really easy to use, because it takes time, you know, to build a very good innovative EdTech startups, because this is a startup that has to work with researchers, that to work with, to do products that are very easy to use. So we need these three things. I think in the US you have the money, because the US have invested massively in this area, but you may need also cultural changes in some areas.
Gregory?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need metrics. We need KPIs. You know, we need data, because a lot of what we're doing is built entirely on faith. You know, we think this works because it's worked, or you know, we think people who go to this school are better than people that go to that school. You know, we think that this technique works better than this technique, and you know, employers think, well, you know, this person has this credential, so that makes them better than people with that credential. Ultimately, you know, we have to be more data driven. We have to be more objective, and we need, you know, good measurements and then transparency around it. And once we have transparency around it, then you know, then employers will start acting on that, and then that'll trickle all the way down, because then the schools will have to change, and then the parents will have to insist on different things, and then the students will insist on different things. So, you know, we need something more than like, you know, Business Week rankings or Economist rankings. We need, you know, cold, hard data that says, hey, you know, this works, this doesn't work. And then we'll know, you know, where we need to go.
Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Marie. Thank you to both of you. So a little bit more data, accurate data, is more a cultural change in France, maybe, and a little bit more money. That will be the le mot de la fin, as we say in French, from our side, because the real last word will be for you, Laurence. Thank you again to you too, Gregory and Marie.
Thank you, Gilles and Laurence.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marie-Christine and Gregory, and thank you very much, Gilles, for moderating this panel. It was very interesting. Always good to have insight from both sides of the Atlantic, and thank you to all the participants for all the questions. And it was a very diverse audience. So I see people from HEC, from EDTech. I also see entrepreneurs. Servan Demol, who is the CEO of Code for Fun, is here as well, and I see also Gabrielle Durana, who is running a nonprofit in education. So I mean, it's very interesting to see what we had to say on all these topics, and I hope it's going to be useful for you. We can continue the conversation online, as Gregory said. We have data. We can post this video on YouTube, and it's something that's not going to be lost. So that's great, and we hope to see you for future edition of our live panel session. The next one will be in 2 weeks. We're not going to announce the speaker yet, but it's going to be a nice session, and then we'll continue throughout the summer, and I think until like maybe the end of September. So we still have a lot of topics to cover. We are always interested in hearing what you have to say. So if you have any topics that you think could be interesting to cover, don't hesitate to send us your comments, your feedbacks. We're always welcome them. We, as the French American Chamber of Commerce, but also I'm sure the magazine Challenge, there's a website page entirely dedicated to these editions, and you can see all the replays of the previous editions. So thank you very much again, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, Gregory and Marie-Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.